Alright, hello, it's Natasha N.K.O, 1753, 29th of June 2026. I've had to check that multiple times a day. I'm going to continue to read from Brothers and Sisters. Last read chapter 7, and in that chapter, we learned all about Mallory's upbringing, her relationship with her parents and her brother, and how he's not just the favourite, it's as though she doesn't really exist in her father's eyes anyway. So I'm reading on from chapter 8 today. It reads, "The storms finally came at the end of October, unexpectedly early and more plentiful than people who'd lived with almost 5 years of drought had expected. The truth was, many Los Angelinos had given up believing in rain, or at least in its transforming powers. The drought had been so long and severe, rain was but a distant memory, but what fell from the clouds was torrential. Nothing like the half-hearted sprinkles of the recent past, which had dampened little more than spirits. The dark clouds that suddenly filled the sky were of biblical proportions, and the storms lasted for days and nights. People were lulled to sleep at night by the rhythmic pounding of the water coming down hard on their roofs. They heard the downpour lashing against their window panes and woke up to find a drenched dawn with a sky that still wasn't clear. Grass that had been brown and patchy turned a lush, brilliant green. Camellias and begonias doubled in size. The leaves on jade plants swelled until they almost burst, and the boughs of lemon and orange trees were bent over with the weight of their fruit. The outline of the downtown skyline, a smoggy mystery to residents of Los Feliz, Pasadena, and Hollywood during the hot spell, was suddenly the view proud homeowners boasted of. But even before the water in the city's reservoirs rose to surpass the satisfactory level, the same people who only a few months earlier had prayed for rain began to wish it would go away. The storms were inconvenient, even dangerous. LA drivers slid across slick streets and highways, crashing into walls and each other. The wet weather was bad for many businesses. Car washes were closed for days at a time. Not only were the owners grim, but hordes of mostly Latino workers were idle. Even the red light hucksters, those new brown-skinned immigrants who hustled oranges, peanuts and bananas at freeway exits, stayed home on rainy days. Mudslides in the hills buried homes and people. More than once, an unfortunate child was swept away when he attempted to swim in a storm drain. 1 week of rain was all it took to forget the drought, the fires, the fear of a water shortage. Los Angelinos shed their newly acquired conservation habits as though they were an unnecessary layer of clothing. They did what came naturally, ran their faucets while they talked on the telephone, let the water flow freely as they brushed their teeth, flushed their toilets after a single pee. Everyone admitted that they needed the precipitation, yet no one really valued it. The truth was, the waterlogged city reminded residents too much of the places they'd left behind. Houston, Oklahoma City, New Orleans. They had come to Los Angeles for sunshine and shirt-sleeve weather, for good times. Watching the rain from their houses, they were as disgruntled as children banished to their rooms. They wanted to go outside and play. The Saturday morning, before the presidential election, Esther stood in front of the oval picture window that overlooked her front lawn, sipping a cup of hot peppermint tea, staring at a fine, steady drizzle. She remembered how she and her brother Stanley used to stand in front of the picture window in their parents' home on snowy Saturday mornings, looking out at their front lawn, itching to get outside to be with the kids from their neighbourhood. Their mother never allowed them out while the snow was actually falling, but as soon as the last flake hit the ground, they took to the streets. After their parents sent them to the white private school on the north side, it was only on Saturday that she and Stanley had a chance to play with the other black kids. These Saturdays were all the more precious, since the two of them had been ostracised by many of the neighbourhood children the entire first year they attended private school. The whispering commenced almost as soon as their absence at their old school was noticed, but the real ugliness began when they opened their mouths. The proper English that was the requisite language of the posh north side was the south side's enemy tongue. Trying to be white, some of the children said, taunting them. No matter how many times she and Stanley denied the accusation, their persecutors wouldn't relent. Trying to be white was an unpardonable sin, then and now. Envious little things are just envious, her mother explained. No, her mother exclaimed. Don't pay them any mind. You all are going to be somebody, and they're not. Her mother's words were more sobering than soothing. The thought that black people could be divided into those who would be important and those who wouldn't, and those who would not, hadn't occurred to Esther before. She wanted to be somebody, but she didn't want to be set apart. She could count her white friends on 2 fingers. Where was she supposed to fit in? But when she asked to return to the public school, her parents said no. During their second year at the white school, a small miracle occurred. Much to their surprise, the same neighbourhood children who taunted them and beat them up the year before welcomed them back into the fold with open arms. What turned the tide, Esther discovered, was her running into one of her tormentors at the corner grocery store. Perhaps feeling guilty, the older girl started a conversation, and while the 2 children were talking, Esther innocently told her how much she and Stanley hated going to private school. That confession had the effect of magic and travelled throughout the neighbourhood in record speed, and only hours later, the same children who had kicked their asses were ringing their doorbell, asking if they could come out and play. Suddenly, it didn't seem to matter that Stanley and Esther talked white. What was important was that they identified as black. Stanley was clueless as to what had brought about the change, but Esther was far more perceptive and vigilant in making sure that the mistreatment and ostracism they had suffered never resumed. Whenever she had a chance, she brought up the topic of her hated banishment to the white school. Subtly, she shifted the blame to her parents. They began to acquire a reputation among the neighbourhood children as merciless ogres who forced their children to go to private school when they really wanted to go to the neighbourhood school like everybody else. When she could manage, Esther sobbed out the entire story for maximum effect, always emphasising, between her tears, that her loyalty would always remain with the neighbourhood. Esther looked away from the rain and felt rumblings in her stomach. She went into the kitchen to fix herself some breakfast. Opening the cabinet where she kept baked goods, she was dismayed to find no apple muffins. Then she remembered that between dinner and a movie with Mallory, she hadn't had time to make her usual Friday night trip to Diamond Donuts. Esther decided to jog to the store, even though she hadn't run in nearly 2 weeks. After changing into her sweats and tucking her hair under a bull's cap, she took a $5 bill from her wallet and ran out the door. Esther was so intent on keeping her head down that she didn't realise there were people on the sidewalk until she was about to run into them. She raised her eyes just in time to see the white woman and her wild-haired child. Between them was a fat poodle. She stopped short, narrowly missing knocking down the little girl and almost squashing the miniature dog. She bent down and put her arms around the little girl's shoulders. "Oh, I'm sorry," Esther said. "I wasn't looking. Did I scare you?" "Oh," the mother said, smiling eagerly. "She's okay. No harm done. Sarah, say hello." "Hello," the little girl said obediently. The woman smiled broadly and stuck her hand out toward Esther. "I'm Carol Linton, and this is my daughter Sarah. We just moved in not too long ago." "She's not pretty, and she's overweight," Esther noted with satisfaction. "If her brother has to pick a white girl, he could at least get someone who looks halfway decent, instead of some homely heifer no white man wants." They stood in the rain, not saying anything for a moment. Then Esther reluctantly took Carol's hand. "I'm Esther Jackson. I live next door." She started to say, "Welcome to the neighbourhood," but the words refused to come out. The front door opened. "Honey," the man called. He called toward Esther in a friendly way. She couldn't quite manage a smile. 2 homely notes, Esther thought to herself as she began jogging. "Honey," she mimicked the sound in her head. Honey, honey, honey. The anger that rose up inside her went to her head immediately, and she could feel her temples throbbing. Why do they bother me so much, she wondered. The rain started coming down harder just as Esther reached the donut shop. Inside, the aroma of coffee and the sweet yeasty scent of baked goods made Esther even hungrier. Trays of glazed, powdered and jelly donuts glistened behind the glass showcase. On the other side, an array of blueberry, carrot, apple and bran muffins were on display. Ahead of her was a woman with a small boy who seemed unable to choose what he wanted. The Korean woman leaned against the counter. The woman and boy finally made their decisions and, clutching their goodies, made a dash to a white Mazda parked right outside the shop. When the Korean woman turned to Esther, her high wattage smile seemed to intensify. Good morning, may I help you? Hi, Esther said. Let me have 3 apple bran muffins, please. She glanced around. The corner table, which was usually occupied by old black men, was empty. Esther pointed to the table and said, I see that your regular customers didn't come today. Huh? Where are the men who sit there? Esther saw a glimmer of understanding in the woman's eyes. She shook her head. Don't come in rain. The shop owner leaned into the counter. Every day come, drink 1 cup of coffee, stay all day, talk, talk, talk. She shook her head in such a way that Esther couldn't tell whether she was happy the men had stayed away or lonesome for their company. As Esther watched, the shop owner put 3 muffins in a small white bag. Esther handed her a $5 bill, but to her surprise, the woman put the bag behind her back and shook her head. No liquor, no muffin. What? Esther leaned closer and could feel her waist pressing against the counter. What did you say? The woman pointed to her bull's cap. No liquor, no muffin. Esther started laughing. I'm from Chicago. Ah, Chicago. Michael Jordan. Pretty good. Pretty good. Michael Jordan. Okay, Chicago. I'll give you muffin. What's your name? Esther said. The woman looked surprised. Hyun, she said softly. I'm Esther. Esther waited for her change, looking out the window as the woman opened the cash register. She was going to get soaked jogging back home. She wondered whether or not the cat would keep her hair dry. Damn, she didn't feel like doing her hair. Behind her, she heard the door of the shop open. Hello, Esther. Her stomach contracted as though she'd been punched, even though the pain she felt wasn't physical. She wanted to bolt through the door, but she couldn't move. Esther didn't need to turn around. She hadn't forgotten his voice, his laugh, even his smell. Don't be smiling, she thought, and don't touch me. Hello, Mitchell. But of course he was smiling, and the first thing he did was to take her hand. She could still feel his fingers after they slid away from her palm. She forced herself to look at him, to take in his faded jeans, the matching jacket, the Gucci loafers with leather soft as butter. God, he looked good, she thought. He wasn't wet, even though he didn't have an umbrella. But then, every obstacle had always gotten out of Mitchell's way, even, apparently, rain. She didn't want to look at him, but she couldn't stop. His hair was different, shorter. She remembered the feel of his rough, crinkly curls, the taste of them against her tongue. She began trembling, a slight rocking movement in her knees, imperceptible to anyone but her. How have you been? He asked. I've been fine, Mitchell. I'm at another bank, still trying to get into lending. She was talking too fast, saying too much, but she couldn't stop babbling. Everything okay with you? You look good, Esther. His eyes were so dark she couldn't see his pupils. She giggled a little, laughter she couldn't control. It's great seeing you, Mitchell. She hoped she didn't sound nervous. She wanted Mitchell to think that he didn't have an effect on her anymore. Wait a minute, don't go yet. He turned toward the Korean woman. Give me 6 blueberry muffins. I'm in a hurry. It was his usual take-charge voice, a tone that didn't allow for excuses or questions. When he had his bag, he looked toward Esther and said, Where are you staying these days? You still in the same place? She shook her head. I moved. I bought a house right up the street in Park Crest. Homeowner, huh? Congratulations. Are you listed? No. Well, I want to call you. I'll take you to dinner. There's a new place on Melrose. You'll love it. I'll call you, she said quickly, because she could feel the pin-prickly edges of the soft mushies trying to invade her consciousness. She looked out the window. It was raining hard, but she needed to get home. Now. Didn't you hear what I said? I want to take you to dinner. She heard all right. She excited him. He wanted her, but only for the moment. Oh, he would take her to some fancy place, wine her and dine her, call her a few times, and then disappear. Esther knew the dance well. She wasn't going for it this time. I've got to go, she said. Good seeing you, Mitchell. Good girl, Esther, she told herself as she rushed out the door. Good girl. The rain felt soft and a little warm as it ran down her cheeks. She shoved the muffins inside her sweatshirt and began to run. She was so intent on getting home that she didn't hear the car slowing down behind her. Only after the horn blared so suddenly that she jumped and the bag of muffins fell onto the sidewalk did she look up to see Mitchell's Jaguar sitting next to her at the curb. He rolled the window down a crack. Esther, let me give you a ride. The gleaming gold from his watch hypnotized her. Aye. Woman, get in the car. She got in the car. Why didn't you tell me you needed a ride at the donut shop? Because I don't trust myself around you, she thought. I wanted to run, she said. Mitchell smiled at her. I won't bite you, said the snake. The words came out fast. Her eyes flashed when they met his, and her lips twitched until she couldn't hold them together any more. They laughed hard and long together, and every time they thought they'd come to the end of it, they found themselves going into yet another spasm, gasping for breath even as their knees brushed and their fingers touched accidentally. All the while, Mitchell was driving. Esther held her head up and looked out the window, thinking how happy her mother would be to see her riding in such a fabulous car with such an obviously prosperous man. By the time they reached her house, they were still chuckling, although calmly, quietly, the joke just an excuse for their eyes to linger over each other. So are you going to invite me in? He asked easily. I'd love to see your house. Esther opened her mouth to object, but Mitchell said, You can't tell me it's not clean. I know you too well, Miss Compulsive. Maybe we could eat our muffins together, like old times. You're not going to send a brother out in the rain, are you? The garage was built for two. Mitchell's Jag slid in easily next to her BMW. Excuse me for a minute, she said as soon as they were inside. She looked terrible, she thought, as she raced up the stairs. She ran into her bedroom, took off her grubby sweats and put on jeans and a tight white cotton blouse. She took the ball's cap off and fluffed out her hair, then ran into the bathroom, sprayed herself with Clinique elixir and put on a little red lipstick, all without letting herself wonder why she was changing her clothes for Mitchell. Damn, baby girl, you'd give eyesight to the blind, he said when she reappeared. Damn, baby, you'd give eyesight to the blind, he said when she reappeared. Show me around. They started on the second floor, and she walked him through the 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, describing the kind of renovations she planned for each room, feeling good that he was with her, that her Saturday afternoon no longer loomed before her like an empty road. They went downstairs, beginning in the living room and ending up in the kitchen. It's a great house, Mitchell said, and she felt good hearing the approval in his voice. They were standing by the kitchen table, and for a minute Esther didn't know whether to ask him to sit down or not. Then she felt his chest press into her back, the heat so sudden and penetrating that she had to step away. I was serious about the muffins. You have any orange juice and coffee? Not instant. He grinned at her, and she laughed because his breath, so close to her neck, tickled, and because she suddenly realized that she hadn't been alone with a man in her own home since she bought it. She tried, but she couldn't stop herself from laughing, from tingling, and she suddenly realized, from hoping the dumbest, most futile hope of all, maybe he's changed. I've learned how to make coffee, she said, getting some drip grind from the closet. You have today's paper around here? Esther was placing the muffins in the microwave. It's right behind you on the counter. I can't reach it, Mitchell said. She glanced at him. He hadn't turned around. Would you get it for me, baby? She walked over to the counter and picked up the paper and handed it to him. Thanks, baby, he said. When the coffee was ready, she poured out 2 cups and placed one in front of Mitchell and the other on her placemat. He didn't look up. She had to ask him to lift his paper so that she could set down the muffins in front of him. She placed the strawberry jam and butter on a little plate in the centre of the table. She sat down and he asked her, still without looking up from the paper, if she had any orange juice. She got up and poured him a glass. By the time she handed it to him, he was already eating. Esther sipped her juice and her cooling coffee, nibbled at the muffin, no longer warm, and gazed at Mitchell. He was looking at the sports section, and from time to time he would grimace and grunt. Finally, he set the paper on the floor and reached for another muffin. Would you put some butter on that for me? It said, would you put some butter on that for me? Esther cut it in two parts, slathered butter on both, and handed them back to Mitchell. Any more coffee? He asked. She took his cup over to the pot, poured another cup, handed it to him, and sat down, feeling a slight tightness in her jaw. This coffee is good, baby, Mitchell said. If we were together, would you make me a cup every morning? She could feel her smile breaking up her tension. She knew she was grinning like a fool, the hope in her eyes as naked and bright as a neon sign, but she couldn't help it. Yes, she would make him coffee, pour it in his cup, hold the coffee up to his lips, or spoon-feed it to him, whatever he wanted, because it felt so good to have him with her. Sure I would, she said softly. Come here, baby, he said in a voice that was used to making commands, used to being obeyed. He shifted the chair around slightly so that Esther was able to ease herself onto his lap. Then he took both her hands and held them in one of his. He put his other hand on her neck and pulled her face close to his. How come we aren't together anymore? I miss you. You're good for me. She felt his lips on her neck, and then her face was full of his kisses. Each wet spot lit a tiny flame inside her. Esther pulled her hands away from his and grabbed the back of his head, letting her fingers rake through his crinkly hair, kissing him harder and harder until their tongues were caught up in a Luther Vandross slow drag full of heat, rhythm, and sweet pressure. Beneath the table, their thighs opened and closed around one another. They rocked into each other's groins and slowly began sliding down the chair and onto the floor. Outside, the rain was coming down in thick, heavy sheets. Under the table, Mitchell's fingers were pulling at her bra, and then she could feel his lips sucking and licking. She reached for his arms to hold her. She wanted to be held and kissed for just a little while. Mitchell kissed her lips again, very quickly. Too quickly. Instead of placing his arms around her neck, he suddenly shifted his weight on top of her and pulled his mouth away from hers. Before she could say, wait, he was inside her. It's all yours, he whispered. Ooh, Esther managed to say. Ooh, she said again, louder. Louder still, her final theatrical moan blended into Mitchell's thunderous, culminating groans. As he collapsed onto her, Esther's neck was rigid. The muscles in her back were tense, and the hands she placed behind Mitchell's neck were knotted into two fists. As she lay on her back, observing the clothes that were scattered across the kitchen floor, Esther knew that she had made a mistake, one that she was already regretting. She looked over at the man lying beside her. Mitchell was softly snoring, oblivious to the cold floor. You asked for this, she reminded herself sternly. He was the same old Mitchell, the same old selfish Mitchell, and she was the same old fool. His eyes opened suddenly. He pulled her close to him, brushed his lips against hers, tweaked her nipples, and looked at his watch, all in one languid, careless motion. Wow, he said, stifling a yawn. I had no idea it was this late. Get me another cup of coffee, baby. 15 minutes later, she watched the back of Mitchell's Jag disappear over the hill on her street. The last thing she saw was his vanity license plate, MVHMD. When she closed the drapes over her living room window, the afternoon stretched before her, as bare and forlorn as a tree in winter. She cleared the kitchen table and put the breakfast dishes in the dishwasher, feeling all her soft, mushy hopes crumpling up inside her like a paper doll that someone had stepped on. On the counter in a small bag were the muffins that Mitchell had left behind. Esther wiped the crumbs off her counter and then swept the floor and watered the purple African violets that were in pots on her windowsill. She went from room to room, dusting, wiping, rearranging, until there was nothing left to do, not one piece of lint she could pretend to pick up. As she stood in the middle of her living room, Esther began whimpering, softly at first, and then slowly building up to a crescendo of sobbing. She cried for nearly 15 minutes, and when she stopped, her head felt light and her eyes hurt. Okay, she told herself, you are over this. You are over this right now. But there were a few more tears in her. And they trickled silently down her cheeks. The house around her, so neat, so obsessively clean, was oppressively empty. She just wanted to talk to somebody. She went upstairs to her bedroom and began dialing Vanessa's number, but hung up the phone on the second ring. Vanessa would know by her voice that something had happened, and she didn't want to have to explain to her about Mitchell. She thought about Mallory then. A vision of the blonde woman storming across the restaurant floor toward her lover, ready to make a scene, came to her, and before she could talk herself out of it, Esther had a telephone book in front of her and was dialing Mallory's number. The lilting hello startled Esther. In the background, she could hear guitars. A man's twangy voice singing, achy breaky heart. Holding the phone, she felt as though she'd dialed the wrong number and was connected to a stranger. She slowly lowered the phone toward the receiver. Hello? Hello? With a deep breath, Esther put the telephone back to her ear. Mallory, it's Esther. Oh! There was such a rush of warmth and happiness flowing with her words, such obvious pleasure in her voice, that Esther was instantly cheered. I just called to say hi. She tried to sound vivacious, to make her voice bright and sunny, all the while wondering why she had called Mallory of all people. Mallory, with her valley girl voice and her sun-streaked hair that rode the breeze like a carefree kite, had no wisdom she could use. Listen, I don't want to keep you. Esther, you don't sound like yourself. Is something wrong? Esther was too astonished to speak. What's the matter? Mallory's voice was soothing, a gentle invitation to talk. Esther hesitated. Then all the words rushed out in a jumbled, nervous bunch. This morning I ran into an old boyfriend, someone I was in love with but swore I wouldn't see again. One thing sort of led to another. He came home with me and we had sex, and now I feel like a complete fool. And afterward, were there skid marks on your floor from him leaving so fast? You know him? I know that guy. Men. Can't live with them, can't put them out on the curb when you're done. What the hell? You want to whine? Cry? Plot your revenge? Whining is good. Okay. Why did he do that to me? Why did he come over and screw me and leave? Why couldn't he spend the afternoon at least? Take me out to dinner and then never call me? Number one, he's not a nice guy. Number two, you let him. Why did I let him? Why? Don't feel bad, Esther. It's just one of those things. He caught you in a weak moment, a horny moment. Next time you'll be stronger. Listen to me, the blind leading the blind. She started laughing and didn't stop until long after Esther had joined in, long after they both felt much better. The city braved election day with umbrellas and raincoats, tracing mud into the residences of grim-faced citizens who now had second thoughts about allowing their homes to be used as official polling places. As drivers skidded and swerved on that rainy Tuesday, talk show hosts bantered with callers who insisted that the downfall of America was imminent if their candidate lost. After Esther finished voting that morning, she switched on her car radio as she headed toward work. The voice of King Clever blared inside her car. And merry friends, we are losing ground. Our rights are being eroded as we speak. Affirmative action activists, welfare rights advocates, feminists, AIDS activists, they are all encroaching on our rights as red-blooded Americans. And I tell you, we need to do something before it's too late. By God, I hope today isn't the beginning of too late. On that ominous note, Esther switched the station. King Clever wasn't speaking to her. The rain was coming down in soft, feathery wisps as Esther turned onto Cranston. The wet weather had slowed the progress of the clean-up efforts on the block, and as she sped along the boulevard, Esther was dismayed once again at the many burnt-out holes and damaged stores that remained from the time of civil unrest. She couldn't help but think about all the pristine West Side and Valley neighbourhoods where April 29 had left no mark. Not 2 feet away, a large crowd of young black teenagers was standing quietly at the bus stop. Their arms were weighted down with books. For some reason she couldn't explain, the sight of them warmed her and made her feel hopeful. Esther let out a small sigh. As her silver BMW zoomed onto the freeway, she felt drained, even as she was on her way to begin her day. Esther stayed in her office the entire morning, working on a personnel report. She enjoyed evaluating her employees, appraising them in a systematic way. From time to time, she glanced through the glass partition or opened the door and stood just outside, listening and watching to make sure things in operations were running smoothly, that everything was functioning in an orderly manner. Each time she checked, she saw that Hector and the 3 other tellers were working steadily, with pleasant smiles on their faces. Customers were being attended to in a reasonable amount of time. Toward lunchtime, when Esther glanced over at the cage, the lines were beginning to get longer. She could see that 2 of the tellers had gone on their break. She was about to tell the assistant operations manager to help out until the lines got shorter when she heard a piercing scream, followed by frightened shrieks. Looking through the partition, she saw a black boy, not more than 16, dashing wildly toward the entrance, his footsteps rapid and frantic. One of the heavy glass doors flew open, and the youth, skinny and fast, raced through. As he was running out, the Western Express delivery man, his arms full of mail, was coming in. "Hey," he said, as the youth collided with him, sending letters flying all over the courtyard. In seconds, the boy was gone. A middle-aged black woman standing in one of the teller's lines was screaming, "My money! He took all my money!" As Esther rushed toward her, she could barely hear herself think. "What happened?" she asked Hector, who seemed to have leapt over the teller's cage. "The woman was holding some money in her hand, and a boy, he grabbed the money and ran," Hector said. "Call the police," Esther commanded. The woman was still shrieking, ignoring the people around her, who tried to quiet her. $1,000, she cried. "Oh my God, oh my God." Esther heard a woman behind her say, "Where the security guard? He's supposed to be protecting people. The bank should pay you." "Oh Lord," Esther thought. She walked up to the woman and put her hand firmly on her arm. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Esther Jackson, the Regional Operations Manager. I know you're quite upset, and I wonder if you would mind stepping into my office. Right this way." The crying woman whirled around to face Esther, who was still gripping her elbow. She was a small, buxom, pecan-coloured woman. Her dark eyes were red from crying. "I think the bank should be liable. I was standing right here in line, about to make a deposit, and a thief comes and snatches the money right out of my hands. What kind of security do you people have?" The woman was sniffling and coughing as she spoke. "If you wouldn't mind stepping into my office," Esther said quietly, squeezing just slightly on the woman's elbow. The woman snatched her arm away. "I demand to see the manager," she said loudly. Esther said quietly, "I am the manager." "The real manager." Esther swallowed. "I am the real manager." The woman eyed her suspiciously. "Well, that man just stole $1,000 from me, and I want this bank to replace my money." Realizing that the woman was enjoying the audience she'd attracted and wasn't about to take the discussion into a private office, Esther tried to get her to lower her voice by whispering, hoping that she would get the message. "Miss, I'm quite sorry about your loss. I can understand how upset you are, but the policy of Angel City is that it isn't liable for the theft of any money not deposited in an authorized account." The woman raised her voice several decibels. "What you mean, authorized account? I was in the damn bank. Where the hell was the security?" Esther held her breath. Hector was quickly and efficiently getting the lines back in order. The people were openly gawking. "Security guards aren't required to intercept robberies," Esther said with a great deal more calmness than she felt. "Well, what the hell do you have security guards for if they're not supposed to stop robberies?" The woman placed her two plump hands on her hips. Her neck started swerving back and her bottom lip protruded. Esther read the signs and knew that an explosion was imminent. She stepped backward just as the woman opened her mouth and bellowed, "I want my damn money!" "Lord a mercy. You ain't no manager," the woman said suddenly and venomously. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. I told you I want to see the real manager." "Lord," Esther prayed, "please don't let me go off on this woman. Please help me not to get ignorant and act a fool in front of my employees." She lowered her voice to a whisper that only the woman in front of her could possibly hear, and then, without changing her expression, which was one of professional concern, she could feel herself crossing over an emotional line, pressing a mental button. Without anything discernible taking place, the south side of her personality blew through her like a harsh, grit-filled wind. Her neck automatically started bobbing, and when she looked down, her two hands were placed firmly on her hips. "Let me tell you something, sister," she hissed through teeth, clamped together so tight there wasn't space for air. "I don't know what you mean by a real manager. If you're looking for a white man to solve your problems, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Now, I am the regional operations manager, not only for this bank, but for 4 other downtown branches. If you can't handle someone who looks like you being in charge, then I'll be happy to refer you to another bank." The two women stared at each other, their eyes as hard as 2 pairs of dice. "Please, Lord." Esther heard a slight noise. She looked to her side, and the Western Express man was standing next to her. "May I say something?" he asked the woman. His voice was straight from a Barry White album, basso profundo, the kind of low, gravelly tone that was created for phrases like, "Right on, right on." The woman closed her mouth. He had everyone's attention. "Now, I know you're upset, but look at this logically. If you was waving a fistful of money in 7-Eleven and the same thing happened, would you expect the store to pay you back? Of course not. And they have security guards there too. But I've been ripped off before, and I know how that feels. Here, I hope this will help a little." He handed her a $20 bill. Then he turned to the rest of the people in the 2 tellers' lines and said, "If anyone is interested in helping this lady out, she sure would appreciate it." Several people came over and handed the woman money, some ones, a few fives, and even a couple of 10s and 20s, which she immediately put inside her purse. "Thank you for at least trying to help me, which is more than the manager did." She gave Esther a long, mean stare. "You didn't have to get nasty. Think you so important," she said, her tone surly. "If y'all can't protect my money, I ain't coming back here no more," she said. "If you would like to close your account at this time, I'd be happy to help you with that," Esther said. The woman glared at her, then turned away abruptly as 2 policemen approached them. "Thank you, Lord," Esther said to herself. She answered the officer's perfunctory questions and listened as the woman described her assailant. In less than 5 minutes, the woman and the police were gone. After they left, she surveyed the area quickly to make sure that the 2 lines were moving, and then she walked back to her office. The minute she sat down, there was a light tap at the door. "Come in," she called out. The Western Express man crossed her office floor in 2 steps and placed several letters on her desk. "You got away so quick I didn't give you your mail." He was an average-looking man, she thought, just a regular light brown-skinned brother with a nose that took up a lot of his face. His hair was a neat fade. His smile, though, gave her the sensation of walking into a brightly lit room, of being in the midst of a festive occasion. "You could have left it out front, where you usually do," she said. He leaned over her desk. "You handled yourself real good out there. I just thought things were about to get out of hand and that you needed a little help from a man," he smiled. Esther felt a frosty wind blowing through her. "Listen, Mr. Tyrone Carter. Mr. Carter. Call me Tyrone." "Mr. Carter, I didn't need your help. I was managing the situation quite well alone, thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm very busy." Esther lowered her head and began reading her report. She didn't look up for a good 5 minutes, but when she did, Tyrone Carter's megawatt smile was blinding her again. He said, "I like your style. Can I take you to dinner this Saturday?" "I'm busy." She said this in her coldest, deep upper north side voice. Tyrone Carter shuddered. "Just got a little chilly up in here." He threw back his head and laughed. The sound was so exquisitely inviting that before she could stop herself, Esther was laughing too, but not for long. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Carter," she said, recovering her composure, "but I am busy on Saturday, and I'm busy now." She gave him a long look without a trace of a smile. "All right, Miss Jackson." He walked to her door and was about to leave when he turned to her and said, "I'll ask you again." Before she could say, "Don't bother," he was gone. Esther closed her eyes. That Tyrone Carter was a real clown. She was almost sorry she had to be so stern, but she knew she wouldn't be doing the man any favours by encouraging him. When she opened her eyes, Charles Weber was standing in front of her. "Oh, Charles," she said, suddenly flustered. As much as possible, Esther avoided being alone with her boss, especially since his days downtown had become numbered. The office scuttlebutt was what Weber had contacted every headhunter in Southern California in an attempt to secure a new position, all to no avail. With each passing day, Charles had become increasingly resentful and hostile. After several meetings, members of his staff whispered that they smelled alcohol in his breath. By the time Charles finally accepted the fact that he was truly on his way to South Central, he also had to endure the news that Kirk would be taking over his old position, at least in an acting capacity. This last news seemed to push him to the very edge, which is precisely where he seemed to be perched, as Esther gazed into his bloodshot eyes. "Tell me everything that happened," he said. He was swaying just enough to make Esther realize he'd been drinking. After Esther finished her account of the robbery incident, Charles sighed heavily. "You should have had her sign a waiver, releasing the bank of all liability." "Charles, the woman was in no mood to sign anything," Esther said evenly, her tone news anchor perfect. "I made it perfectly clear to her that Angel City wasn't liable in any way." "Did you get her name and address?" His piggy eyes rested on her breasts, and now his tongue protruded slightly from his mouth. She hardened her eyes and stared into his. "You little asshole," she thought. "No, I didn't, Charles. The situation was pretty chaotic. The woman was quite upset and—" "That's just my point," Charles shouted. He stepped closer to Esther, and now she could smell the liquor, although just faintly. "She could be contacting a lawyer as we speak. You should have gotten her name and address and had her sign a waiver." "Charles," Esther said softly. "Oh, Charles." "Charles," Esther said softly. "I really don't think we're going to hear from that customer again. And if we do, I think that the legal department can easily handle any claims she might make. I'd hate for this mismanagement of a situation to have to go into your personnel file." He leaned closer to her. "Is that a new perfume you have on? Do you smell like that all over?" He grinned at her, revealing a bit more of his tongue. Esther could feel the rage pulsing through her body, making her head pound. She wanted to slap his face so badly that her palms were itching. At the same time, logic told her that in a few days this man would be out of her life for good. "Charles," she began, stepping backward and hoping that she would say the right words. The door opened again and Mallory came in, her face moist and rosy as though she'd been running. "I just heard what happened. My God, are you okay?" "Oh, hello, Charles." Charles straightened up and his lizard's tongue darted inside his mouth. He nodded curtly toward Mallory, letting his eyes linger on her breasts, just long enough to make her begin to twitch with anxiety. "We'll talk later," he told Esther. Then he left. When the door closed, Mallory turned to Esther. "What's wrong? Did he say something to you?" Esther hesitated for just a moment, but her rage was too volatile to contain. "That asshole! He was in here asking about the robbery, and then he tells me I mishandled it because I didn't get the woman to sign some stupid waiver that doesn't exist. And wouldn't it be a shame for that to go in my personnel file? And by the way, that perfume you're wearing is turning me on. He did the same thing to me. 2 of my loans are in trouble. Both the clients were burned out during the riots, and Charles is trying to make everything my fault. He threatened me too, and he tried something similar with Sandra. Ever since he found out he's going to South Central, he's been trying to intimidate women by holding their personnel files over their heads. He's out of control. Do you think he's serious? He's upset about his transfer. He's trying to take it out on someone. Whether he'd really put anything negative in our personnel files, I don't know. There was anger in her voice, but Mallory raised her hands in a helpless gesture of frustration. So what happened during the robbery? Some kid snatched $1,000 out of a customer's hands and ran out the door. The woman got hysterical and demanded that the bank replace the money. I heard that people started giving her money. When I was talking to her, the guy who delivers for Western Express sort of butted into the conversation. Well, actually, he was trying to help. He did help. He convinced her that the bank wasn't liable. And then he gave her $20 and asked other people to give her some money too. Mallory raised her eyebrows. A hero. I wouldn't exactly call him that. I would. A hero with great buns. What? Mallory peered out the glass partition. You don't think he's got great buns? Esther glanced into the operations area. Tyrone was staring into her office, and when she looked his way, he smiled. He did have a nice body and a great smile. Well, baby got back, she said absent-mindedly. What do you say? Mallory's eyes, crinkled around the edges, were filled with puzzlement. Baby's got what? You mean he's got a nice back? Like a broad, strong back? Mallory searched her friend's face for a clue. No, no, you don't mean that. Esther suddenly chuckled. Ever since she and Mallory had started calling each other on weekends, she seemed to be constantly explaining things to her and revealing more of herself in the process. The first time a piece of her carefully monitored blackness slipped out in front of Mallory, she was startled. She so seldom dropped her guard. But gradually, when she was with Mallory, the South Side, that carefully hidden neighbourhood full of riotous anger and gut-belly laughter, that place of Southern cooking and Baptist churches, that place of sorrow and dreams, would no longer stay put. It means he's got a nice butt, she said finally. A back is a butt? A back is a butt. Baby got back, Mallory repeated in her high, whiny voice. She sounded like Murphy Brown trying to do gangster rap. Why are you laughing? Does the term cultural dissonance mean anything to you? Esther took another look into the operations area, just in time to see Tyrone heading for the door. Why was she wasting her time staring at a glorified mailman? She turned back to Mallory, her face suddenly becoming somber. Listen, we've got to deal with Charles. What do you mean, deal with Charles? Mallory asked. She seemed both startled and fearful. I mean, I'm not letting him ruin my future, Esther said. I think we need to confront him, Sandra, you and me. We all need to walk into his office and tell him that we're united and we aren't going to take his bullshit. That if he so much as writes one word in any of our personnel files, we'll all charge him with sexual harassment. Do you think that Sandra will come with us? I don't know. For the first time, Esther heard the tentative quality of Mallory's voice. You're coming, aren't you? Mallory sighed. Esther looked at Mallory. Ever since she'd gotten to know her, she'd realised that her staunch feminism was a veneer she used to cover her fearfulness. I'll do most of the talking, you just be there. Sandra declined their invitation to join them. She said that Charles's bark was worse than his bite. She didn't feel it was necessary to confront him face to face. She knew how to handle him, she told Mallory. They were overreacting. The 2 women arrived at Charles's office right before noon. Charles rose from the chair behind his desk when they entered. Have a seat, he said. Despite the redness in them, his eyes were alert, wary. Lord, please put the right words in my mouth, Esther thought as she sat down. Charles, Esther said, her voice sounding loud and almost strident in the silence of the office. Mallory and I would like to discuss a matter of grave importance to us. I don't have a lot of time right now, he said, waving his hand as though he were telling them goodbye. You better make time, fool. Esther's hands began to ball up into two fists. This won't take long, she said. She took a deep breath, then stood up, opened her hands and put them on the desk. She leaned across it so that her face was directly in Charles's. Today, you hinted that I mishandled this morning's robbery and that you were thinking about putting a negative evaluation of my performance in my personnel file. Then you told me that I smelled good and asked me if I smelled. And asked me if I smelled that good all over. Am I remembering the sequence of events? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Charles's voice was calm, but his face had grown red and contorted. He looked ready to explode. For a moment, even Esther felt like retreating. Don't be a punk, she told herself sternly. Punk, punk, punk. Mallory eyed Esther, desperately wanting a black woman to back down. Esther took a deep breath and moved in closer to Charles. She could feel his breath on her face. I think you do. Mallory certainly knows what I'm talking about. Isn't that right? Mallory managed to nod. Yes, she said, her voice squeaky and thin. Esther's voice got louder, stronger. And so does Sandra Grossman. In the last several weeks, we've all been the recipients of your threats and sexual harassment. She wielded those last words like a weapon. Charles began to slump in his seat. Neither Mallory, Sandra, nor I are interested in sleeping with you, Charles. We don't want to date you. Is that clear? You will be with us for another week, and during that week, we don't want you staring at our breasts or our hips. We don't want you licking your lips at us. We don't want you calling us anything but our names. Do you understand me? Now, if my or Mallory's personnel records are changed, we'll go straight to Kirk and we'll be discussing some of your other offensive and highly suggestive remarks. Do I make myself clear? As Esther was speaking, Charles remained subdued. He acted like a defeated man, but as soon as she had finished, he sprang out of his chair like a wild dog on the attack, the gold pinky ring and the dangling bracelet sparkling as he waved his hand back and forth. I never heard such a crock of shit in all my life, he snarled. Who do you think you're talking to? Some stupid kid? I never harassed either one of you. He stalked across the room until he stood directly in front of the two women. You girls are looking for action. That's your problem, he said with a sneer. You wish I would look at you. You've been coming on to me, both of you. And when I do the write-ups, don't think I won't include that bit of information as well. He smiled, a triumphant grin full of malice. Am I making myself clear? Esther stole a glance at Mallory and saw that her face was as pale as a piece of paper, absolutely bloodless. Her own heart was pounding, frantic little thumps. She could feel rage coursing through her body. Her mouth was full of burning words. She knew she should take a deep breath and regain control, but she didn't want to calm down. She wanted to go off. Before Esther could stop herself, she put her left hand on her hip, craned her neck to the side, and pointed her right finger at Charles's face, almost touching his nose. Fuck you, you bald-headed, polyester suit-wearing, pot-bellied, drinking on the job, 2-inch pudding dick motherfucker. Let me make myself crystal damn clear. I know some guys who take your little pale, flat ass out for $100, and I have $100 now. She said, getting right up in Charles's face, so close her eyes began to cross. If you put a negative review in my personal file or any of our files, you'd better take a damn bodyguard with you when you go to work and when you go home at night. If you think I'm playing, try me. She was panting when she finished, and her head felt light. Charles's shiny moon face was red. Sweat was beading on his hairless pate. On his hairless pate. He opened his mouth to speak, but could only make a faint gagging sound. Esther knotted her hand into a fist and slammed it into her other palm. Charles jumped back at least 2 feet. "It's been great talking with you," Esther said. "You just remember what I said. Do not try to fuck with us." She nodded toward Mallory, who, appearing nearly as frightened as their boss, looked at Charles and then at Esther. For a fraction of a second, it seemed as though she didn't know whose side she was on, but then she slowly stood up and followed Esther. Neither woman said a word until they were inside Esther's office. Mallory cleared her throat and said in a high, whiny voice, full of wonder and just a little fear, Do you really know people like that?" Esther tilted her head and watched Mallory as she fidgeted with her fingers. "Like what?" Like you told Charles about. Men who would hurt him." Esther peered into Mallory's face and saw Barbie the innocent. For a minute, she wanted to slap her more than she wanted to hit Charles. "What do you think, Mallory?" The white woman shrugged her shoulders and shook her head. Had she said something wrong? "I don't know." "Mallory," she said tersely, "it's straight out of The Godfather." Mallory's head jerked a little, as though Esther had hit her. She stood there feeling stupid and a little ashamed, but at least she understood the anger in her friend's face. I just wish I could be that angry and show it. But where did all that come from?" Ghetto 101. Mallory moved forward eagerly, her bright grey eyes like headlight beams searching in the dark. "Do they have that at Cal State?" Esther looked at Mallory's sincere face and burst out laughing. Mallory looked momentarily stricken, as if she'd been slapped. Then the tiniest giggle escaped from her lips, and she began to laugh too. Esther leaned against the wall with her head thrown back, her hunched shoulders shaking in a jerky rhythm. Each time they tried to stop laughing, the two women only had to look at each other to start up again. "What do you think he's going to do?" Mallory asked between bursts of laughter. "I've no idea. Suppose he still puts that stuff in our files." "Oh, yeah? He'll wake up with a horse's head in his bed." "Shit!" They fell against the glass partition, their bodies bent over and spasmodic, laughing so loudly, so wildly, that they didn't even notice the customers turning to stare at them. Brilliant. Oh, I could say so much, but I'm going to let the chapter speak for itself. That was chapter 8. Thank you for listening.